morning and welcome to Daybreak, which is live on A News. Thank you for joining me this morning. Now, why don't we go through the headlines? Let's take a look. Trump heads to China for high-stakes summit with Xi Jinping as Iran war law looms over talks. Russian attacks in Ukraine kill 6 and Ukraine hits Moscow's gas facilities after ceasefire expires. And the WHO tells countries to prepare for more hantavirus cases. First this morning, US President Donald Trump is traveling to Beijing for his first visit to China since 2017. Trade disputes, rare earth exports and tensions over Taiwan are expected to dominate the talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Now let's take a look at the report.
US President Donald Trump is due to arrive in Beijing on Wednesday, ahead of 2 days of talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. It will be the first face-to-face meeting between the two leaders in more than 6 months, and Trump's first visit to China since 2017. The summit comes as fighting linked to Iran continues to disrupt shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Trump said he does not believe Washington needs China's help to end the conflict.
With the Iranians, do you think he can help in any way?
No, I don't think we need any help with Iran. We'll win it one way or the other. We'll win it peacefully or otherwise.
Trade is expected to be one of the main issues on the agenda, as Washington and Beijing discuss extending a truce over Chinese restrictions on rare earth exports. The materials are essential for defense systems, electronics and electric vehicles. Chinese customs data shows exports of several specialized rare earth minerals remain sharply lower than before controls were introduced last year in response to Trump's tariffs. Taiwan is also expected to be a major point of tension during the summit. China repeated its opposition to US arms sales to the island on Wednesday, after the Trump administration approved an $11 billion weapons package for Taiwan in December. In Beijing, security was tightened ahead of Trump's arrival, while some residents expressed skepticism about the visit.
He's not trustworthy. He's like, 80 years old now? He's quite old. He sure loves to stir things up. He's always getting into conflicts with other countries and stuff. Honestly, I have a really bad impression of him.
I don't know if he's genuinely sincere about this, but speaking as a Chinese person and as someone working in trade, I just hope some good policies can come out of this.
More than a dozen American business executives are expected to accompany Trump during the visit, with possible Chinese purchases of Boeing aircraft and US agricultural products also likely to be discussed.
Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to Al Jazeera and what is going on in regards to Iran. It says, why is Iran increasingly targeting the UAE in its war messaging? So what we know is we start with growing tensions in the Gulf this morning after reports that the United Arab Emirates secretly carried out a major attack on Iran during the war. Now, the Wall Street Journal was actually the ones to find out this information and said that the operation was retaliation for earlier Iranian attacks on Emirati facilities and included a strike on Iran's Lazan Island just before the 7th of April ceasefire. So what does that now mean? Well, Iranian officials have since warned that if the US and Israel launch fresh attacks, the UAE could face stronger retaliation. The Revolutionary Guard has also claimed that ships traveling to and from the UAE's key port of Fujairah could fall under Iranian jurisdiction in the Strait of Hormuz. So it's something that Iran is definitely preparing themselves for, just in case the ceasefire does end, and it might be one of their next targets in regards to what the UAE had planned and following a likely retaliation from Iran. Okay, now let's go over to the next headline, which is on The Guardian in relation to Russia. Now, Russia has reported that it's, or suggested rather, a cargo ship, which is this one, if we just scroll down, that exploded several times before sinking off Spain's southeast coast may have been carrying nuclear submarine reactors bound for North Korea. The Ursa Major was a Russian-flagged vessel owned by the state-linked company Urbano Logistics. It was reportedly sailing from St. Petersburg to Vladivostok when it went down off the coast of Murcia on the 23rd of December 2024. So that's roughly 2 years ago now. Now, crew members did say that there had been 3 explosions in the engine room, but later that evening, Spanish rescue efforts were cut short when Russian warship arrived and took control. Now, the Spanish government document does say that the Russian warship then fired flares over the Ursa Major, possibly to interfere with infrared satellite monitoring, or could have been something else. But this information has just come out, and a number of papers and news websites are covering this particular story in regards to where the ship was going and why it sank in that area on the seas just in December 2024. Okay, now let's go to the next headline this morning, and that's over on USA Today, and it's something that we have later on in the program that we'll be covering. More hantavirus cases are expected, the WHO chief has said that what they are doing is urging countries to prepare for more hantavirus cases after officials in Paris said a French woman infected on board of the MV Hondius cruise ship. I thought I could see it there, but no, that's just it's a cruise ship that was taking a number of passengers, over 100 passengers, to a number of countries to enjoy their holiday. Now, on that ship, they developed a most severe form of the disease, and this lady in France is now on a ventilator. Now, the WHO is urging authorities to follow its guidance, including a 40-day quarantine and close monitoring of high-risk contacts. The outbreak began on the MV Hondius sailing from Argentina to Cape Verde after 3 passengers actually died from the virus. Now, hantavirus is usually spread by rodents, though in rare cases it can actually be spread between people if in close contact. Now, the WHO does say that it has confirmed 9 cases of the Andes variant so far, including the French woman and a US national evacuated from the ship. And the Andes variant is the person-to-person contact and not the rodent normally which carries the actual virus. Okay, now let's turn over to our next headline, which is on the BBC, and that's in relation to Eurovision. Now, Israel qualifies, but Boy George is out of Eurovision, and Boy George is in relation to, I believe, the UK, but Eurovision now, where Israel has made it through to grand finale with the pop song Michelle, performed by this young man, 28-year-old Noam Betem. The contest has been overshadowed by controversy surrounding Israel's military action in Gaza, with 5 countries deciding to boycott this year's event, including Ireland and Spain. Now, Betem who is the Israel's contestant, received a mixed reaction during Tuesday's semi-final, with boos and anti-Israel chants from some of those in the crowd. Others also shouted in support of the contestant. Now, that reaction could be heard on the television broadcast after the host broadcaster in Vienna decided that they would not censor protests aimed at contestants, but decided that they were actually going to leave it in. So you can actually hear that organisers actually say that one audience member actually had to be removed by security because they were disrupting the show. Now, later on in the programme, presenter Katie Wilson will have more information in relation to this, as she is following the event of the Eurovision and finding out all the different information, as well as the Azerbaijan contestant, who will be talking to someone from her team later on today in relation to how the performance will be going tomorrow, as she is in the second semi-final tomorrow that will be aired on Thursday. Okay, well, that currently is the morning press headline. So that's rising tensions between Iran and the UAE, new questions over a Russian cargo ship that sank off Spain, and a possible rise in cases over the hantavirus on a cruise ship outbreak, and the controversy around Eurovision. Now let's go to a short break, and then I'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the global stories for the morning. Now we turn to the UK, and its political arena is entering a period of heightened uncertainty as Prime Minister Keir Starmer confronts mounting pressure over his future ahead of the King's speech later today and a major parliamentary confrontation. Here's more.
As the UK prepares for the state opening of Parliament, Prime Minister Keir Starmer is facing one of the most serious political crises of his premiership, with growing pressure from within his own Labour Party for him to step down. Despite the turmoil, Starmer will join Wednesday's grand ceremonial proceedings led by King Charles III, where the monarch will deliver the King's speech, a statement written by Starmer's government setting out its planned new laws and political agenda for the year ahead. King Charles will travel to the House of Lords to outline more than 35 proposed bills and draft laws focused on the economy, national security and reforming public services. Later in the day, the Prime Minister will face further pressure as he takes questions in Parliament and delivers a speech during a Commons debate. The pressure on Starmer intensified after Labour suffered major losses in local elections. 4 ministers resigned and called on the Prime Minister to step down, joining more than 80 Labour MPs, urging him either to quit immediately or announce a timetable for his departure. Despite the unrest, Starmer has insisted he will continue governing. Speaking after what he described as a destabilising 48 hours, he said Britain faced a choice between moving forward with reform or returning to chaos and instability. He added that the government remained focused on cutting the cost of living and protecting national security during an increasingly dangerous global climate. On the other hand, more than 100 Labour MPs signed a statement backing Starmer, saying this was no time for a leadership contest. Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy also defended the Prime Minister, saying that Keir Starmer had his full support and that critics had failed to unite behind an alternative candidate.
Now turning over to the war in Ukraine, and Russia and Ukraine are trading accusations after a short US-mediated ceasefire expired on Monday, with renewed strikes hitting both countries.
Russia resumed large-scale attacks on Ukraine after a 3-day ceasefire linked to Friday's commemoration of the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. Ukrainian officials say more than 200 drones were launched overnight into Tuesday, damaging energy facilities, apartment buildings, a kindergarten, and a civilian locomotive. In the Dnipropetrovsk region, local authorities said at least 6 people were killed. 2 people died after a drone struck an apartment building in Kryvyi Rih, the hometown of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. 4 others were killed in an aerial bomb attack northeast of the city. Zelensky accused Russia of continuing its attacks after the ceasefire expired, while Kyiv said Moscow had escalated the conflict instead of extending the pause in fighting.
Ukraine has stated that we will respond in kind to Russia. We offered a ceasefire. Unfortunately, after 3 days of relative calm, there have been more Shahed attacks and airstrikes. Activity on the front lines remains high. Therefore, we are responding.
On the front line, Ukraine's military reported 170 combat clashes over the past 24 hours, with the heaviest fighting concentrated around Kostiantynivka and Pokrovsk in eastern Ukraine. Kyiv also said its forces struck gas facilities in Russia's central Orenburg region, more than 1,500 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Saturday that the conflict was coming to an end, a position the Kremlin reiterated on Tuesday. US President Donald Trump also said the end of the war appeared to be very close.
Yeah, I think it's getting very close. The end of the war in Ukraine, I really think it's getting very close.
But Zelensky rejected that assessment on Monday, saying Russia showed no intention of ending the war and warning that Ukraine was preparing for further attacks. Moscow said it would welcome continued US mediation efforts and that Putin could meet Zelensky once a peace process is finalized. However, major differences remain unresolved, with Russia demanding additional territory and Ukraine insisting that Russian forces withdraw from occupied areas.
Staying on this, Russian President Vladimir Putin says Russia will deploy its new Sarmat strategic nuclear missile by the end of the year. Putin said the missile is capable of carrying nuclear warheads over long distances and can penetrate existing and future missile defense systems. Here's the report.
Now for Sarmat. We began working on it in 2011, and in 2018 this work and the advantages of the new advanced missile systems, including Sarmat, were publicly announced. Let me remind you what was discussed at the time and what the advantage of our latest system is. First, it is the most powerful missile system in the world, comparable in capability to the Voyevoda missile system currently in our arsenal, which, as just noted, dates back to the Soviet time. The total weight of the delivered payload exceeds that of any existing Western counterpart by more than 4 times. The missile can travel not only along a ballistic trajectory, but also along a suborbital one. This, thirdly, makes it possible to ensure a range of more than 35,000 kilometers, while at the same time doubling its accuracy. Finally, it has the ability to penetrate all existing and future anti-missile defense systems. By the end of this year, Sarmat will indeed be placed on combat duty.
The UK and France have co-hosted a meeting of over 40 nations to discuss a defensive mission to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The UK is deploying the HMS Dragon to the region as a show of intent, but members of this international coalition currently remain reluctant to intervene unless the situation in the waterway stabilises. Reporter William Denslow reports from Brussels.
According to the UK's Defence Secretary John Healey, the purpose of this virtual gathering was to turn diplomatic agreements into practical military plans. He says it is a bid to restore confidence and ultimately to see the resumption of trade flowing through the Strait of Hormuz, this incredibly vital waterway accounting for around a fifth of the world's energy. He says that restoring that confidence, getting energy and other supplies through this strategic waterway is the #1 priority. Now, he says that this meeting is an opportunity to turn words into tangible actions. That is why he says that the UK is deploying the HMS Dragon to the region to show that it is serious about making tangible steps going forward. The UK isn't the only one making such pledges to show real concrete action. Lithuania has said it is willing to provide mine-sweeping assistance to try and clear the Strait of Hormuz going forward, to try and provide that confidence to allow vessels to once again pass through this waterway that has seen transit effectively stop to a crawl amid this ongoing conflict between the US and Israel and Iran. The Trump administration in the United States has been long calling for its allies around the world to do more, to be braver, to take stronger action to help clear the Strait of Hormuz and to facilitate the passage of vessels through this waterway. But there remains a huge sticking point. The UK and coalition partners say they are willing to engage more proactively when they say conditions allow. But there are huge questions over what exactly those conditions will be. Currently, it certainly seems that because of the volatility in the region, there is very little appetite to execute some of these plans and risk putting their vessels, their personnel, in harm's way. William Denslow, Free News, in Brussels.
Staying on the issue of the Middle East, and at least 13 people have been killed in Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon, according to the Ministry of Health and state media. The attacks come amid continuing tensions between Israel and Hezbollah. The situation on the ground remains highly volatile, with both sides reporting strikes and casualties as hostilities persist in the region.
Lebanon's Ministry of Health and State Media say at least 13 people have been killed in Israeli airstrikes in the country's south. The attacks come amid ongoing tensions between Israel and Hezbollah. According to the state-run national news agency, at least 6 people were killed and 7 injured when a house was hit in the Kfar Dunain area. The Lebanese Ministry of Health said 2 members of the Civil Defense Emergency Service were killed and 1 injured in an Israeli strike in Nabatea. They were reportedly carrying out a rescue mission in response to an earlier attack. The Israeli military said it is reviewing the reports. Lebanon's health ministry accused Israeli forces of deliberately targeting medical workers, calling it a violation of international humanitarian law. It said 108 emergency medical staff have been killed since the war began. Separately, a Syrian national was killed and his wife injured when an Israeli drone struck a motorcycle in the Tar Deba area, according to officials. Israel said it targeted a suspect attempting to launch an air attack. In another incident, 3 people were reported killed in an attack on the Jabshit area. Hezbollah said it carried out drone attacks on Israeli positions, while the Israeli military said it has intensified operations in southern Lebanon, targeting Hezbollah infrastructure. Officials from both sides are expected to meet in Washington on Thursday to discuss a possible ceasefire. Lebanese authorities say 2,869 people have been killed since the war began, while Israel reports 18 soldiers and 4 civilians killed over the same period.
Now, as the race to the Eurovision Grand Final heats up in Vienna, the first semi-final has delivered its first fair share of surprises, fan favourites and plenty of atmosphere inside the arena. A News' Katie Wilson has more on the countries heading through and the mood surrounding this year's contest.
There we have it. We now know the 10 qualifiers from the first semi-final of the Eurovision Song Contest and who will be making it to Saturday's grand final. Now, there were some surprises in there, but some that were pretty expected. So we have Greece and Finland, both top of the odds, no surprises there. Belgium, quite a surprise. Sweden, Moldova, Israel, Serbia, Croatia, Lithuania and Poland. So 10 very happy countries, 5 not so happy, including San Marino, which featured none other than Boy George. So it was a great semi-final, very electric in the arena. And we've been speaking to one participant from Greece who is very happy this evening. How are you feeling?
So happy, so excited. Can't wait for Saturday. Can't wait for Saturday. I'm so ready. Let's go.
I think he's very happy there and very colourful. So we'll definitely wait to hear more from Katie later on in the week with everything concerning Eurovision. Now, let's turn over to a different topic in relation to the hantavirus. And the World Health Organization says more hantavirus cases linked to the cruise ship MV Hondius could still emerge in the coming weeks. Despite no current signs of wider community spread, health authorities across Europe continue monitoring evacuated passengers as quarantine and medical checks remain in place.
The World Health Organization says more hantavirus cases linked to the cruise ship MV Hondius could still emerge in the coming weeks, as health authorities across Europe continue monitoring evacuated passengers and crew. WHO says 11 hantavirus cases are now linked to the cruise ship MV Hondius, including 9 confirmed infections of the Andes strain and 2 suspected cases. 3 people linked to the outbreak have died. Confirmed and suspected cases are now under isolation or medical monitoring following a multinational evacuation operation in Tenerife. Health officials say the Andes strain is unusual because it can spread between people in rare cases, though experts stress it is far less contagious than COVID-19. The WHO says there is currently no sign of wider community transmission, but warned more cases could still emerge because the virus can take weeks before symptoms appear. Among the latest confirmed infections is a French passenger who became ill after being evacuated from the ship and is now in intensive care in Paris. French President Emmanuel Macron said strict quarantine protocols were in place for all identified contacts.
Today, the government undoubtedly has some of the most stringent protocols, like Spain and a few others, which is a good thing because we have past experience. However, it's not a matter of comparing what's not comparable. This is a virus which is known to have characteristics different from what we saw during COVID-19. And so, the government has made the right decisions. The situation is under control, under its authority. Thanks to our healthcare workers. I want to thank you. Now, it's important that there be real European coordination, meaning that the protocols move towards the most demanding standards that have been defined in the very short term, and that the World Health Organization can coordinate all of this, as it should.
Doctors treating the patient say she is suffering from a severe cardiopulmonary form of the disease and is being treated with an artificial lung.
The patient currently has the most severe form of cardiopulmonary presentation and is receiving what is at the final stage of supportive care, extracorporeal circulation for artificial oxygenation. She has a heart-lung machine, a blood diversion, which we hope will allow her to get through this critical period while her lung, damaged by the virus, and the vascular wall recover.
Spanish authorities have also confirmed another positive hantavirus case among passengers quarantined in Madrid.
Now let's head over to the US, and its appeals court has temporarily paused a lower court ruling against President Donald Trump's 10% global tariff, temporarily restoring the duties for the importers that challenged them in court. The decision follows an appeal by Trump administration after a trade court ruled last week against tariffs imposed under the Trade Act. The case was brought by two businesses and the state of Washington. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit says it is now considering whether to extend the pause while the legal battle continues. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent arrived in South Korea on Wednesday for trade talks with Chinese Vice Premier ahead of this week's China-U.S. summit. Now, the discussions are expected to cover trade and other issues before the two leaders meet from Thursday to Friday. Both officials are also scheduled to hold separate meetings with South Korean President Lee Jae-myung at the presidential office in Seoul. Now to South America, and tens of thousands of people have marched across Argentina against government cuts to public universities. The protests come as President Javier Milei faces failing approval ratings and growing pressure over the economy.
Tens of thousands of Argentines marched through Buenos Aires and other major cities on Tuesday to demand more funding for public universities. Students, lecturers, researchers, trade unions, and opposition politicians joined the demonstrations, which ended outside the presidential palace in Plaza de Mayo.
The quality of professors is not the same because we have to do different jobs. Clearly, only working as professors is not enough. This affects professors, researchers, and the entire university community. Today, the accumulated inflation over the last 2 years means our salary is below the poverty line.
The protests were triggered by budget cuts introduced by President Javier Milei as part of his plan to reduce public spending and eliminate Argentina's fiscal deficit. Last year, Milei vetoed a law passed by Congress that guaranteed higher funding for universities. Although lawmakers later rejected the veto, the government has still not released the money included in the legislation.
Without this law, we have fewer resources for science, research, grants, for students to be able to access university, but also, for example, so that fellow professors, students and researchers can have a grant and research different topics.
Which will decide whether the government must implement the funding law approved by Congress.
The European Commission has invited representatives of the Taliban to Brussels for talks on returning Afghan migrants who have been denied the right to stay in Europe. EU officials say the discussions are aimed at improving deportation procedures for individuals considered security threats or convicted criminals. The Commission stressed the invitation does not amount to formal recognition of the Taliban government in Afghanistan. Egypt is positioning itself as a key trade bridge between Europe and the Gulf as shipping instability in the Strait of Hormuz forces countries to look for alternative freight routes.
A cargo corridor linking Italy to Egypt is expanding deeper into Gulf and African markets. The roll-on, roll-off or row-row route was launched around 2024, connecting Italy's Trieste port with Egypt's Damietta port across the Mediterranean. It has since been extended beyond Egypt, with cargo moving through the Suez Canal or overland to Red Sea ports, before continuing to Gulf destinations including the UAE, Kuwait, Oman and Qatar. Amar Kataya of Zenith Enterprise for Marine Services says the route significantly cuts transport times.
It considerably reduces the shipping period between Europe and the Arabian Gulf because it takes only 36 hours for a vessel from the Suez Canal to Jeddah port in Saudi Arabia.
However, analysts say the corridor cannot fully replace the Strait of Hormuz, as repeated loading and unloading limits capacity. They add that while the route is still developing, pressure on global supply chains is driving interest in alternative links between Europe, the Gulf and Africa.
Now to a quick break. When I return, we'll take a look at the regional headlines this morning, and I will be joined by a guest to dig further into some of those key stories. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's go to the stories in the region, and we don't have to hop very far as we stay in Azerbaijan for the Baku Urban Week is taking place ahead of the World Urban Forum 13, which kicks off on Sunday. Now this event aims to link global urban issues with local life in the Azerbaijani capital. Meanwhile, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev has reviewed preparations for the WF 13 at Baku Olympic Stadium. Organisers say that more than 32,000 participants from 180 countries have registered for the forum, marking a record turnout for the event in its history. The forum will also highlight reconstruction projects in Karabakh and the East Zangezur, alongside Azerbaijan's Smart City and Smart Village initiatives. Staying on this key event, Afghanistan's Environmental Protection Agency will take part in the World Urban Forum. Officials say the country plans to use the event to highlight Afghanistan's environmental challenges. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
Afghanistan's Environmental Protection Agency is preparing to take part in the World Urban Forum in Azerbaijan. The preparations were discussed during a meeting here in Kabul between the Director General of the Environmental Protection Agency, Matiullah Khalis, and the head of the UN Habitat in Afghanistan, Stephanie Luz, along with her delegation. According to the official statement, the meeting focused on arrangements for an Afghan delegation led by Matiullah Khalis to travel to Baku for the upcoming World Urban Forum. At the start of the meeting, the Director General welcomed the UN Habitat delegation and described the visit as important for Afghanistan. He asked UN Habitat officials to help make the necessary arrangements for the Afghan delegation's participation and to support strong coordination with relevant international bodies during the forum. The statement says Afghanistan wants to use the conference to highlight its existing environmental challenges. Both sides agreed that the country's priorities should be presented clearly to the international community. Stephanie Luz, the head of the UN Habitat in Afghanistan, thanked the Director General and briefed him on the World Urban Forum and the arrangements for the event in Baku. The World Urban Forum will be held in Baku from 17 to 22 May. It is co-organized by UN Habitat and the government of Azerbaijan. The forum is a major global event on sustainable urban development, focusing on housing, planning, resilience, and climate challenges. For Afghanistan, the participation in the Baku Forum is expected to be an opportunity to raise issues linked to environmental pressure, urban growth, climate vulnerability, and the need for international cooperation. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Now let's turn to the 8th summit of the European political community that was held next door in Yerevan, and a public exchange between President Ilham Aliyev and President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola. With this in mind, what is the nature of Azerbaijan's relationship with Europe? Joining me now to further discuss that particular question is the head of department of the Center for Analysis of International Relations, is Vasif Husanov. Welcome to the program this morning.
Thank you.
It's good to have you, and really we can kind of delve into this particular topic. You've published something in your article by Common Space, and you argue that relations between Azerbaijan and the European Parliament have become particularly strained. Why is the European Parliament so distinct from other EU institutions in its approach to Azerbaijan?
It's actually not the first time for us to see a different approach from European Parliament towards Azerbaijan, and that's the reason why actually I called this double approach from the European side towards Azerbaijan in its South Caucasus policies. On the one hand, on the executive branch, we see very advanced relations between Azerbaijan and the European Union. Just a couple of months, over the past couple of months, we have seen many European leaders traveling to Baku, meeting President Aliyev, talking about strategic importance of the relations with Azerbaijan for the European Union, and particularly in these challenging times. And against this background, we see European Parliament adopting very biased resolutions regarding Azerbaijan. And as President Aliyev recently said, the number of these resolutions is now over 10. It's now about 14 resolutions have been adopted so far over the past 4 or 5 years. And it is actually not the only issue in which we see European Parliament taking a different position on critical foreign policy issues, and particularly very different from that of the European Commission. And while the European Commission is trying to advance relations with Azerbaijan, understanding the relations with Azerbaijan for the European energy security, for European connectivity projects, on the other hand, we see that European Parliament does not actually realize its importance. Even in one of the resolutions adopted recently, they called for the termination of exports of energy from Azerbaijan. It would be a disaster for those European countries which are actually relying on Azerbaijani natural gas to diversify their energy supplies. So it shows that European Parliament is actually not that much aware of the present situation in the European Union. And at the same time, over the past 3-4 years, we have seen lots of scandals, particularly Qatargate scandal with the European Parliament. And one of the very prominent international institutions recently said that over the past few years, we haven't seen much change in European Parliament's domestic structure after the scandal with Qatargate. So it shows that European Parliament has very deep structural problems, moral problems, and also corruption problems, while it still claims that it has moral high ground when it comes to foreign policy issues, human rights, democracy, and they feel themselves confident enough to lecture other states.
So what do you think made the exchange between President Aliyev and President Metsola at the EPC summit? What do you make of that particular exchange? Do you think that the European Parliament has adopted these 14 resolutions as you picked up? And why are they perceived to be so negatively against Baku?
You know, at the moment, we are observing very historic developments in the South Caucasus. We are now just a couple of months before signing a peace treaty with Armenia, if everything goes smoothly in Armenia after the parliamentary elections next month. So, as Prime Minister Pashinyan recently stated in the European Political Community Summit, over the past 2 years, we haven't seen any fighting between Armenia and Azerbaijan, no casualties. And also, we have started economic relations, trade relations, humanitarian exchanges, expert exchange. So these are indeed historical developments between our two countries. And we are actually observing many European countries, I would say even all of them, supporting this historic moment in the South Caucasus. And that's what we are expecting from European Parliament as well, because it's a parliament that claims to represent all the European people, and it claims to be a democratic entity, as Roberto Metsola stated. But we have observed completely different approach in a way that actually undermines the peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan rather than supporting it. And it raised eyebrows in Baku, and I would say in Yerevan as well, because the Armenian government at the moment they are quite invested in the peace process. They are trying to advance it, to sign a peace treaty with Azerbaijan, but also they also understand that these resolutions by the European Parliament and the statements by the parliamentarians, they are actually working in the hands of those groups who are opposing the peace process with Azerbaijan. So therefore, the position of the European Parliament is indeed ununderstandable, incomprehensible. It's very hard to get a clear idea of what they want to achieve. And that's the reason why actually I ended my article, which you mentioned, by the question, whose interests the European Parliament actually serve in the South Caucasus?
Yes, which is an important question because you're trying to get mixed messages. You get one message from the EU as a bloc, and then from the European Parliament you get a completely different kind of relationship or discourse. But many of the European Parliament's resolutions, as you mentioned, are presented as supporting Armenia's resilience. Yet some of their provisions touch directly on highly sensitive matters. Could such positions inadvertently maybe complicate Armenia's own prospects or undermine the peace process?
Absolutely. It is something in our private exchanges with Armenian experts we discussed as well. Because at the moment there are two camps in Armenia running for the parliamentary elections. And the camp of the opposition groups, they are clearly opposing the peace process with Azerbaijan. And they vote that if they come to power, they will reverse these agreements. They will reconsider the deals which have been already signed between Armenia and Azerbaijan, thanks to the mediation of the US President Donald Trump. Therefore, the messages coming from the European Parliament and these parliamentarians are actually emboldening these groups who are opposing the peace process. And they believe that it is not only some political forces in Russia that support them, but there are also significant political groups in Europe, in the West, which are supporting the agenda of these opposition groups. And it actually creates a very weird moment. We see that the positions of the opposition groups in Armenia, some political forces in Russia, and this European Parliament, they are overlapping. And it is a very interesting moment for Armenia's own situation as well. So it is, it can be argued that European Parliament has these corruption issues still, and some political forces in Europe which are linked with Armenia diaspora and which are linked with opposition groups in Armenia, they are supporting these parliamentarians in the European Parliament and encouraging them, pushing them, adopting such biased resolutions towards Azerbaijan.
I see. You've also written about broader institutional problems within the European Parliament. In your view, are these difficulties specific to the Azerbaijani case, or do they reflect more systematic issues within the Parliament itself?
I would say it is more systematic issues, which is the reason why we have seen increasingly more calls within Europe for the reformation of the European Parliament. Particularly after scandals like Qatargate, it looks like European Parliament is now detached from the realities of Europe. And they are adopting resolutions which are actually working against the interest of the European people. And these parliamentarians there, they feel themselves much, in a way that they have moral high ground. They know everything better than those people in the executive branch. And that's why they adopt resolution statements and they make some policy proposals which are very much detached from the realities, interests and concerns of the European people. And this is the particular reason why there are increasingly more calls within Europe for reformation of the European Parliament. Because people realize that this Parliament has very significant democratic deficit, this Parliament has corruption issues, structural problems, and therefore there is very high demand for its reformation.
Oh, I see. So a lot of calls for reformation, for changing things in its systems because of how it currently operates. Well, in that sense, my last question really is how challenging will it therefore be for Azerbaijan to continue developing strong relations with the European Union when one of its principal institutions remains problematic to Baku?
The developments over the past 2 or 3 months between Azerbaijan and the European Union and also European member states, EU member states, have demonstrated that these resolutions biased the attitude of the European Parliament cannot actually negatively affect relations between Azerbaijan and the EU, which is the reason why Azerbaijan authorities, in response to the questions about European Parliament's resolutions, they said that we are actually not much worried about this because our relations bilaterally with EU member states are advancing. Over the past couple of weeks, and also very interestingly, just 3-4 days after the adoption of the European Parliament resolution, Italian Prime Minister Meloni was in Baku, and she talked very positively about relations with Azerbaijan, how it is important for Italian energy security, for European energy security. And actually, it is not only about energy. As Prime Minister Meloni mentioned, it's about connectivity, it's about defense relations, it's about overall geopolitical context. And therefore, we are in Baku is pretty much confident that the relations with the European Union and also bilaterally with EU member states will continue to develop in the upcoming months, and the European Parliament resolutions will not be able to prevent these relations from advancing.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me this morning and for explaining that, Mr. Hassanov. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now, A News brings you an exclusive investigation into growing questions surrounding French military-linked flights to Armenia. Flight tracking records show movements by French Air and Space Force aircraft following President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Yerevan, raising questions over whether diplomacy was accompanied by a wider defence logistics operation. The records do not prove what was transported. Let's take a look at this.
What is France really doing in Armenia? French reporting gives the official frame. According to Le Figaro, President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Yerevan centered on a strategic partnership with Armenia. Defense cooperation was already part of that picture, with Armenia's 2024 order of 36 French-made Caesar howitzers. But the questions now go further. They ask whether the public partnership was moving alongside a deeper military track. Macron arrived in Armenia in early May. His formal state visit began on May 5th. Then come the aircraft records. ADSB material shows an Airbus A330-200 of the French Air and Space Force flying toward Yerevan on May 4th. The next day, it left Yerevan for Paris. Hours later, the aircraft flew from Paris to Istres-le-Tubet, a French military airbase. This proves movement, not cargo, but it raises the logistics question. Was this only official transport or part of a wider military support chain? The same aircraft appears earlier in separate tracking material, moving east from Europe on March 28th, then appearing around the South Korea-Japan area between March 29th and April 3rd. That timing matters. In Japan, French and Japanese defense ministers signed the Japan-France Defense Roadmap on April 1st. In South Korea, Macron and President Lee Jae-myung agreed on April 3rd to deepen cooperation, including in defense and energy. Again, this proves movement, not cargo, but it places the aircraft inside a wider pattern of defense-linked diplomacy. Then came the A400M file. A tracking image from May 11th shows a French military A400M moving eastward toward the South Caucasus. According to the claim being examined, cargo linked to this route was declared to Georgia as gas cylinders, lithium batteries, and chemical substances. But the question is whether the actual cargo was different, possibly Caesar-related components, assemblies, or support equipment. That question became sharper after Caesar howitzers appeared in footage from Yerevan ahead of Armenia's May 28th Republic Day parade. So the issue is not only Macron's visit, it is what moved around it. What was declared to Georgia? What permission was granted? And did the cargo match the legal status of the flight? Under the 1944 Chicago Convention, civilian and military aircraft operate under different legal regimes. So if military cargo was moved under a misleading declaration, it would raise questions about airspace permission, transit approval, and the integrity of civil aviation rules. The public record shows partnership. The flight records show movement. The footage shows Caesar systems in Armenia, and the cargo claim still needs verification. Until the A400M manifest, Georgia's transit permission, ICAO compliance records, and independent confirmation are clear, the case remains open, not proven, but serious enough to demand answers.
En effet, en quelque sorte de la majorité géopolitique de sortir de cette entrave et de se tourner vers l'Europe. On ne peut pas faire comme si ça n'existait pas, nous Français. On doit embrasser ce choix et l'engager.
It's now time for a quick break. When I return, I'll have a full update of the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Don't go anywhere. Hello, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and if you're just joining me, I'm your host Nadia Gyane, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Trump heads to China for high-stakes summit with Xi Jinping as Iran war looms over talks. Russia attacks in Ukraine kills 6, and Ukraine hits Moscow's gas facilities after ceasefire expires. And the WHO tells countries to prepare for more hantavirus cases. Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to Deutsche Welle's website in relation to West Africa, where Nigeria airstrikes have killed 100 at a market, Amnesty International says, saying that at least 100 civilians were killed in a military airstrike on a crowded market in the northwest. Now Amnesty say that the strike hit the Tumfa market in Zamfara state on Sunday and is calling for immediate investigation. The Red Cross has also confirmed that the strike took place, but Nigeria's military disputes reports of civilian deaths and says it has found no verifiable evidence of casualties. Now, local leaders say that dozens of injured people are being treated in a nearby hospital and that many of those killed were women and girls. Now, this actually comes after weeks after another market airstrike in the Jili in northeastern Nigeria, where around 200 civilians were reportedly killed last month due to a number of airstrikes as well. Now, this is on the wider backdrop in relation to what's going on in Nigeria's struggle with banditry and jihadist violence, with armed groups carrying out raids, kidnappings and extortion in rural communities. So they're trying to get a grip on that, but at the same time, unfortunately, they're targeting innocent civilians who are just going to their local markets for food, groceries and a number of daily items. We'll definitely keep you informed if we have any other information in relation to this military attack on a local market in northeastern Nigeria. Okay, now let's turn to our next story making news this morning, and that's the hantavirus. As we go on to the Guardian website, the head of the WHO tells countries that they are urging countries to prepare for more hantavirus cases, especially after officials in Paris said that a French woman infected on board of the MV Hondius has developed the most severe form of the disease and is now on a ventilator. The WHO is urging authorities to follow its guidance by including a 42-day quarantine and close monitoring of high-risk contacts. Now, the outbreak began on the MV Hondia sailing from Argentina to Cape Verde after 3 passengers died from the virus. Now, the hantavirus is usually spread by wild rodents, though in rare cases it can also pass between people that are in close proximity. But the WHO says it has confirmed 9 cases of the Andes variant so far, including the French woman and a US national who has been evacuated from the ship. So all those nationals that have been, those passengers that have been repatriated to a number of countries across Europe and North America are now being closely monitored and kept on a 42-day quarantine, because we know experts say that this is the time that sometimes symptoms can show up between that time, and they want to make sure that the spread of this virus is limited. Not only that, that anyone who is affected gets to receive the right medical help as well for it. Okay, now let's turn to our next story this morning, and that's in relation to Trump and Xi Jinping. This is on the A News website, and where the US president is now traveling to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping, and they will meet in Beijing tomorrow for high-stakes talks, which will be focused on rising tensions over trade, technology, Taiwan and the Iran conflict. Now, Trump will actually bring tech leaders along with him that include Elon Musk and Tim Cook, who is Apple's CEO, and plans for headline-grabbing deals, hoping that they'll be able to make some form of deal, especially within the tech center. Now, Trump says that he expects China's leader Xi Jinping to give him a big fat hug when he gets there. That's what he said when he was talking to reporters outside the White House. Now, the meeting comes at a tense moment in relations between the world's 2 biggest powers, and expectations for any major breakthrough are quite low, but both sides are under pressure to stop things from getting any worse. And that's what, according to the experts that are going into exactly how these talks could go. And while both leaders have publicly talked about their personal relationships, analysts say that the summit is more about steadying ties, delivering a full reset rather than anything more than that. But we'll keep you updated. Trump actually lands this evening over in China, in Beijing, and then tomorrow there'll be talks as well as on Friday as well. But let's turn to our report for more on this particular story.
US President Donald Trump is due to arrive in Beijing on Wednesday, ahead of 2 days of talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. It will be the first face-to-face meeting between the 2 leaders in more than 6 months, and Trump's first visit to China since 2017. The summit comes as fighting linked to Iran continues to disrupt shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Trump said he does not believe Washington needs China's help to end the conflict.
With the Iranians, do you think he can help in any way?
No, I don't think we need any help with Iran. We'll win it one way or the other. We'll win it peacefully or otherwise.
Trade is expected to be one of the main issues on the agenda, as Washington and Beijing discuss extending a truce over Chinese restrictions on rare earth exports. The materials are essential for defense systems, electronics and electric vehicles. Chinese customs data shows exports of several specialized rare earth minerals remain sharply lower than before controls were introduced last year in response to Trump's tariffs. Taiwan is also expected to be a major point of tension during the summit. China repeated its opposition to US arms sales to the island on Wednesday, after the Trump administration approved an $11 billion weapons package for Taiwan in December. In Beijing, security was tightened ahead of Trump's arrival, while some residents expressed skepticism about the visit.
He's not trustworthy. He's like, what, 80 years old now? He's quite old. He sure loves to stir things up. He's always getting into conflicts with other countries and stuff. Honestly, I have a really bad impression of him.
I don't know if he's genuinely sincere about this, but speaking as a Chinese person and as someone working in trade, I just hope some good policies can come out of this.
More than a dozen American business executives are expected to accompany Trump during the visit, with possible Chinese purchases of Boeing aircraft and US agricultural products also likely to be discussed.
US President Donald Trump says Iran is under control as Washington increases pressure on Tehran through military threats and an expanding blockade on Iranian ports. Our correspondent Ubay Shambada has more from Washington.
As he departed China on Tuesday, President Trump told reporters that, quote, "We have Iran very much under control." And he reiterated that either a deal is going to be made with Tehran or the Iranians will, in the president's words, face decimation. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth told Congress that the U.S. has a plan to escalate if necessary. The White House believes that the economic pressure of the blockade on Iran's ports and threats of renewed military operations will force Iran to accept a deal that would have Iran relinquish its remaining stockpile of highly enriched uranium. So far, however, Iranian authorities have refused to accept the deal presented to them by President Trump's team. And President Trump on Tuesday also said that his main concern remains in ensuring that Iran is not able to build a nuclear weapon, despite the financial hardships facing the U.S. economy as a result of increased oil prices. The United States Central Command said on Tuesday that its forces had redirected 65 commercial vessels and disabled 4 ships amid an American blockade on Iranian ports that was imposed last month. 3 vessels had been redirected since it was reported on Monday. Not all were Iranian or linked to Iran. According to recent leaks to the media, American intelligence agencies are telling policymakers in Washington that Iran has regained access to most of its missile sites, launchers, and underground facilities. Some of the alleged intelligence being reported suggests that Iran has restored operational access to most of its missile sites stationed along the Strait of Hormuz. Mubi Shabander, A News, Washington.
Russia and Ukraine are trading accusations after a short US-mediated ceasefire expired on Monday, with renewed strikes hitting both countries. Let's take a look at the report.
Russia resumed large-scale attacks on Ukraine after a 3-day ceasefire linked to Friday's commemoration of the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. Ukrainian officials say more than 200 drones were launched overnight into Tuesday, damaging energy facilities, apartment buildings, a kindergarten, and a civilian locomotive. In the Dnipropetrovsk region, local authorities said at least 6 people were killed. 2 people died after a drone struck an apartment building in Kryvyi Rih, the hometown of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. 4 others were killed in an aerial bomb attack northeast of the city. Zelensky accused Russia of continuing its attacks after the ceasefire expired, while Kyiv said Moscow had escalated the conflict instead of extending the pause in fighting.
Ukraine has stated that we will respond in kind to Russia. We offered a ceasefire. Unfortunately, after 3 days of relative calm, there have been more Shahed attacks and airstrikes. Activity on the front lines remains high. Therefore, we are responding.
On the front line, Ukraine's military reported 170 combat clashes over the past 24 hours, with the heaviest fighting concentrated around Kostiantynivka and Pokrovsk in eastern Ukraine. Kyiv also said its forces struck gas facilities in Russia's central Orenburg region, more than 1,500 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Saturday that the conflict was coming to an end, a position the Kremlin reiterated on Tuesday. US President Donald Trump also said the end of the war appeared to be very close.
Yeah, I think it's getting very close. The end of the war in Ukraine, I really think it's getting very close.
But Zelensky rejected that assessment on Monday, saying Russia showed no intention of ending the war and warning that Ukraine was preparing for further attacks. Moscow said it would welcome continued US mediation efforts and that Putin could meet Zelensky once a peace process is finalized. However, major differences remain unresolved, with Russia demanding additional territory and Ukraine insisting that Russian forces withdraw from occupied areas.
Now, as the race to the Eurovision Grand Final heats up in Vienna, the first semi-final has delivered its fair share of surprises, fan favourites and plenty of atmosphere inside the arena. A News presenter Katie Wilson has more on the countries heading through and the mood surrounding this year's contest.
There we have it. We now know the 10 qualifiers from the first semi-final of the Eurovision Song Contest and who will be making it to Saturday's grand final. Now, there were some surprises in there, but some that were pretty expected. So we have Greece and Finland, both top of the odds, no surprises there. Belgium, quite a surprise. Sweden, Moldova, Israel, Serbia, Croatia, Lithuania and Poland. So 10 very happy countries, 5 not so happy, including San Marino, which featured none other than Boy George. So it was a great semi-final, very electric in the arena. And we've been speaking to one participant from Greece who is very happy this evening.
Hey, yo, madam.
How are you feeling?
So happy, so excited. Can't wait for Saturday. Can't wait for Saturday. I'm so ready. Let's go.
He is very, very happy. Well, staying on this topic, let's watch a short clip of Azerbaijan singer Jiva's video, who will be performing in the second semi-final tomorrow with this song, Just Go.
I carried your love inside my heart each day. You set our fire will never fade away. Your name was my dream at night. When I saw the light, oh, I was yours all the way. But now I see through your disguise. The truth is burning in my eyes. Go, I don't love you anymore. Go, without you I'll shine. You know I'll erase you from my soul. Go, I don't wanna see your face. Go, no more tears will ever flow. I'm begging you, just go.
I'm now joined by the head of media for Azerbaijan Eurovision delegation, Turab Temrov. Welcome to the program. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Well, we just saw a nice video clip of the contestant, Azerbaijani contestant Jiva there. How is she preparing for the semi-final? How are things?
It's going pretty well. In general, I just want to tell you that there have been a couple of rehearsals that, once again, the first one went pretty well. The second one, we had some improvements in terms of vocals, and we're just getting there. We think that tonight is going to be a jury show, and she's just going to do her best. In general, we're pretty confident that Jiva is going to represent Azerbaijan at her best, and basically taking into account the fact that not just for Azerbaijan, for the participating countries, Eurovision is much more than just a song contest. It's one of the biggest cultural platforms in the world, and being here gives us, Jiva and all other participants, not an opportunity to showcase our culture, who we are, not only through music, but also through our identity, our creativity, and our hospitality, and of course our cultural heritage.
Yes, definitely. And the song that she's singing is so emotive, so passionate. So I'm sure she will wow the judges today and go straight through when we see her on the semi-final second attempt on Thursday. Now, last night, we know that Finland, Greece and Israel all went through to the finals. Now, this year has also, we know, has been marked by a lot of controversy over Israel's participation. How is it? Is there a lot of tension inside, inside the camp, so to speak? Or is this now being that particular type of tension being blocked out by how people are preparing for the contest?
Of course, we're aware of the discussions around this year's contest. Well, in general, saying Eurovision is this international event, so it's naturally reflects some of the conversations and tensions that exist in the world. But inside the Eurovision environment, the focus is very much on the artist. So there are many artists that have been preparing for months, some of them for years, and with the team behind them. So the focus is rather on the performance itself yes, the topic exists in the background, and it would not be kind of honest to say that nobody's aware of it. But at the same time, the day-to-day atmosphere is very positive. It's focused on the music, on the preparation, on delivering the best possible performance.
And you mentioned that obviously it's a display of culture, it's a display of different countries putting their, best singers in front of a global stage. But in that, how much do you think politics plays into all of this? Because we know that so many different countries are represented in so many different ways. But do you think politics does have a say in that?
Well, to be honest, Eurovision has always been about, officially has always been about music. But of course, in real world culture, public opinion is very connected. So I think it would be unrealistic to say that politics never plays any role. And at the same time, the strength of Eurovision is that it gives countries a cultural language to communicate with each other. And sometimes music can say things in more emotional way than politics. But of course, the politics it plays a very important role. But for us, for Azerbaijan, we try to focus on what we can control. We can control the song, we can control the staging, the message, the way we present our country. So those are the factors that we're going to control. And of course, those are the factors that we take into account while delivering. And we're, as I mentioned before, we're going to do our best to deliver, to represent Azerbaijan at its best. So that's the main goal, I would say.
Yes, definitely. And it's a goal that everybody wants to see their own countries represented in the right way. Why do you think there is so much passion that so many, those watching, viewing, those there, really contribute towards the Eurovision Song Contest? Why do you think it's so popular and exudes so much passion in relation to what they see on screen?
Well, first of all, fans. There's a really big fan community, so the media coverage is also very important. As you know, so many countries watch. So also yesterday you witnessed that Finland, Greece, Denmark, despite the fact that they are, those are like separate countries, but they already have fans all around the world, and we evidenced that yesterday. So I attended the first semi-final, and oh my God, that was something else. Absolutely, the staging, everything. So they take that very serious, and the fans, the amount of joy and that this contest brings, is just enormous. So I think with the Eurovision, nothing is guaranteed until the live show happens, but a rehearsal. So I would say probably you can always expect the unexpected. It's very unpredictable. So that's another factor that makes it so interesting.
Yes, and as you mentioned, there's a lot of media, a lot of attention surrounding it. Now, we know that Azerbaijan will be performing in the second semi-finals on Thursday tomorrow. What are your hopes? What do you hope that will happen for Giva in relation to getting through? We really want her to make it through to the finals. But what's your hopes in relation to tomorrow's performance?
That's exactly what we want to achieve. But at the same time, this year, it is indeed very competitive. And from what we see in fan discussions, media coverage, and current predictions, so countries, as I said, it's very unpredictable. So everything depends on the staging, on her vocals. And to be honest, Giva is a very strong vocalist. She's a very strong singer. So I think she's got exactly what it takes to get to the final. The most important thing is kind of to fight back the anxiousness, and that's very natural, of course, but she's doing her best. No. And I think, as I said, she's got what it needs to get through to the final.
And I think she does too. We're all here definitely rooting for Giva. Hopefully we will be watching tomorrow as she comes onto the screens and waiting to see that she pushes through to the final. So thank you so much, Mr. Termov, for coming on to the program and discussing that with me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, let's head over to the World Health Organization, who's actually saying that there could be more hantavirus cases linked to the cruise ship MV Honduras. could still emerge in the coming weeks. Despite no current signs of wider community spread, now health officials across Europe continue to monitor those evacuated from the MV Hondius as quarantine and medical checks remain in place. Let's take a look.
The World Health Organization says more hantavirus cases linked to the cruise ship MV Hondius could still emerge in the coming weeks, as health authorities across Europe continue monitoring evacuated passengers and crew. WHO says 11 hantavirus cases are now linked to the cruise ship MV Hondius, including 9 confirmed infections of the Andes strain and 2 suspected cases. 3 people linked to the outbreak have died. Confirmed and suspected cases are now under isolation or medical monitoring following a multinational evacuation operation in Tenerife. Health officials say the Andes strain is unusual because it can spread between people in rare cases, though experts stress it is far less contagious than COVID-19. The WHO says there is currently no sign of wider community transmission, but warned more cases could still emerge because the virus can take weeks before symptoms appear. Among the latest confirmed infections is a French passenger who became ill after being evacuated from the ship and is now in intensive care in Paris. French President Emmanuel Macron said strict quarantine protocols were in place for all identified contacts.
Today, the government undoubtedly has some of the most stringent protocols, like Spain and a few others, which is a good thing because we have past experience. However, it's not a matter of comparing what's not comparable. This is a virus which is known to have characteristics different from what we saw during COVID-19. And so, the government has made the right decisions. The situation is under control, under its authority. Thanks to our healthcare workers. I want to thank you. Now, it's important that there be real European coordination, meaning that the protocols move towards the most demanding standards that have been defined in the very short term, and that the World Health Organization can coordinate all of this, as it should.
Doctors treating the patient say she is suffering from a severe cardiopulmonary form of the disease and is being treated with an artificial lung.
The
patient currently has the most severe form of cardiopulmonary presentation and is receiving what is at the final stage of supportive care, extracorporeal circulation for artificial oxygenation. She has a heart-lung machine, a blood diversion, which we hope will allow her to get through this critical period while her lung, damaged by the virus, and the vascular wall recover.
Spanish authorities have also confirmed another positive hantavirus case among passengers quarantined in Madrid.
Rising diesel prices are leaving many Indonesian fishermen unable to work, with boats stranded at port and crews calling for government support.
Hundreds of fishing boats remain docked at Juwana port in Indonesia's central Java province. The port is usually one of the region's busiest fishing hubs, with vessels returning from eastern waters carrying mackerel and tuna for export markets such as Thailand, China, and Japan. But rising diesel prices are now putting pressure on boat owners and crews.
The price increases have happened about 3 times. The first was after Eid, when it rose to around 14,000 rupiah. Then it increased again to about 18,000. And now the latest information puts it at around 27,000 to 30,000 rupiah.
For traditional fishermen, fuel is one of the biggest costs. Ahik says diesel now makes up around 70 to 80% of a vessel's operating expenses, while current fish prices are not enough to cover the pressure. The impact is already visible across Juwana.
The impact is that fishermen cannot go to sea. Out of around 1,680 boats in Juwana, only about 79 were operating in March, and around 425 in April.
For crew members, staying ashore means losing their only source of income. Many say they have spent most of their lives at sea and have few options for work on land.
It's a very heavy burden, because when we are at home, we have no income. As fishermen, once we return to land, we have no other skills. It's difficult to find work on shore. We don't have the connections or experience.
Boat owners are now urging the government to step in, warning that without support, more vessels could remain idle. For Indonesia's fishing communities, the surge in fuel costs is no longer just a business problem. It is threatening the livelihoods of those who depend on the sea.
Now we head over to Europe, and EU defence ministers have met in Brussels to discuss military readiness, Ukraine's support and Europe's response to instability from the Middle East to its eastern borders. Let's go to Anita Sharma with more from the Netherlands.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where EU defence ministers met in Brussels to accelerate military readiness, increase support for Ukraine, and respond to mounting instability from the Middle East to Europe's borders. The European Defence Agency will be strengthened with new innovation and experimentation units, recognizing that Ukraine has transformed modern warfare with drones and rapid battlefield adaptation, reshaping defence planning. With Ukraine Minister Fedorov and NATO Deputy Secretary General Shekerinska joining discussions, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas confirmed the first tranche of the EU's €90 billion Ukraine loan will be disbursed next month, with funds going directly toward drones, now seen as one of Kyiv's most critical capabilities. Ministers also addressed unlocking €6.6 billion frozen in the European Peace Facility, while advancing EU security guarantees for a potential truce, including expanding the EU satellite center's role in ceasefire monitoring, tracking Russia's shadow fleet, countering sanctions evasion, and modernizing 2 Ukrainian military training centers. Regarding the Strait of Hormuz, they warned any closure is untenable and that Operation Aspidus could be extended to the strait. On Lebanon, ministers explored a new EU mission to strengthen state control, building on €100 million in support for the Lebanese armed forces. Kallas said, quote, "The stronger the Lebanese army, the weaker Hezbollah." Finally, she warned Russia is preparing for a long-term confrontation with the West, while Europe's defense industry is still scaling up too slowly. Ministers and industry leaders looked at ways to speed up arms production, close capability gaps, and make deterrence credible. Attention now shifts to NATO's eastern flank and the Bucharest 9 summit, where Secretary General Mark Rutte will give fresh signals on Europe's next security moves later today. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Now, from all the way from the EU to Azerbaijan, we go to this particular story. Travelling along the historic East-West Silk Road route, an international rally crossing 19 countries has completed its Azerbaijan leg. Organisers say the journey aims to build cultural bridges between Eastern and Western civilizations, while giving participants a chance to explore new regions and traditions.
Stretching from Europe towards Central Asia, the Silk Road Rally completed its Azerbaijan leg after travelling through multiple countries along the historic East-West route. Organised by the East-West Silk Road Rally Association, the journey brought together participants from Germany, Austria, Italy, Turkey and the United Kingdom. According to organisers, the rally aims to strengthen cultural exchange and encourage closer connections between people from different regions. Participants crossed 19 countries throughout the route, facing difficult weather conditions, long-distance driving and border procedures along the way.
There are 2 civilizations, Eastern civilization and Western civilization. These 2 civilizations have never truly been at peace with one another throughout history. In reality, neither is inferior or superior to the other. Each has its own strengths and shortcomings. Our goal is to build a bridge between these 2 civilizations. Discovering the unknown is a beautiful thing.
The rally initially started with 28 participants and 17 vehicles departing from Germany. Due to harsh weather conditions and technical problems encountered during the journey, several teams were unable to continue the route. However, organisers said the experience itself remained more important than the number of vehicles reaching the destination.
Last time it was kind of different in Baku, and
Now all the buildings were rising as well. And it's always beautiful to be here. It's a very beautiful city, a very crowded city. And also all the areas around are very, very nice and good to explore. So for example, in the morning we went to a German village, and it was kind of impressive because all the buildings were kind of German architecture. So I feel like home every time when I'm coming here.
Participants said the rally gave them an opportunity to experience different cultures and described the hospitality they received in Azerbaijan as memorable.
Silk Road Rally, this is my 4th year, and I've been 4 times with the Silk Road Rally group. Because of the war in Iran, we came through Azerbaijan. It's a very, very much nicer route, of course, you know, like a very wealthy nation, and everywhere is glowing with wealth, and it's incredible for me to see Azerbaijan, and very friendly, of course. They made us very welcoming here.
After Azerbaijan, participants plan to continue toward Turkmenistan and potentially further toward Nepal or Tajikistan, depending on visa procedures for the next stages of the route.
Those looks amazing. I would love to do that. They get to cross from east to west. I mean, how great an experience that is, and get some hospitality from Azerbaijan. Well, those are the top stories for this morning. Thank you for joining me. Make sure you stay tuned to A News throughout the course of the day for further updates as well. And yes, I'll be back on your screens tomorrow morning. Take care.